All right, we are live in the Fireside PM podcast with a very old friend, former classmate of mine, Rahul Mehendale. Rahul, welcome back, my friend. How are you doing?
Thanks, Tom. They're doing any better, and I would need an AI avatar to duplicate myself.
Well, for those who don't know about your background, you have such an interesting background. You've done so many things in your career and you're working on great things now as well. So I'm excited to talk about the future, but maybe we could just start with, who's Rahul?
Sure. Ah, thanks. And birds of feather flock together. So that's how we know each other. So I'm a little bit of a recovering entrepreneur and a disruption bigot. I've done multiple startups. My last company was a company called MySkin, where we were the first in the world to have figured out how to quantify skin health. So, skin, which is our largest organ, didn't really have metrics which would help you define the health of the organ, right? So, for example,
Mhm.
when I ask even a dermatologist, how much moisture is good for your skin? After they tell me that, oh, you got to moisturize, you do this and do that, they all go like, wow, good question, right? So here we are or using product without knowing what metrics actually denote healthy skin, much less know if the product is working for us or not. So we wouldn't be taking insulin if we didn't know sugar in our blood, or we wouldn't be taking cholesterol if we didn't statins if we didn't know the amount of cholesterol in our body. So similarly, skincare products, you need to know what is optimal skin, what are the metrics for optimal skin, and then take it from there. So we were the first. We had an optical imaging device. By the way, I'm getting some sort of an echo. I don't know if you are getting an echo too.
Is the event open in another tab on your browser that is kind of playing the live stream a little bit
No,
after?
nope. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway,
If not, I can do one more setting here. I see it now. You will not be getting an echo now.
there
Try
we
it.
go. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is much better. All right. So, we basically came up with an optical imaging device which would measure and quantify the health of skin. And then, based on that quantification, it would tell you what product to use along the dimensions of product, diet, lifestyle, and lifestyle. Right. So, it was a real holistic skincare optimizing platform that we built out. So, I did that, got a large strategic investment from this $19 billion annual revenue German company called Evonik, after which I decided to transition out. In a prior life, I'd also started another company called Stoplift with one of my classmates from business school. It actually came out of Clay Christensen's class. So Clay Christensen, as you know, coined the term disruptive technology. So he was a mentor, and after business school, he asked me to go to Deloitte to help found a disruptive innovation practice. So that's what I did prior to MySkin. And then post MySkin, actually Deloitte reached back out to me and they said, hey, would you like to come into the firm and help stand, run, and grow future of health inspired businesses?
Mm.
So MySkin, for example, we had actually created this space called SAMD, which is software as a medical device. So we were the first, literally in 2007, nobody had used software to drive medical assessments. So that's what we had already, that's the space we had created, along with the space of, or the category of quantified skin. We worked with AWS at that time to make AWS HIPAA compliant. So at that time, there was no such thing as HIPAA and, HIPAA compliance in the cloud. I mean, at that time, cloud truly was a word which meant rain is going to be, you're going to be you're soaked in rain. So we had done all that. And that's why, I was very much at the cutting edge of healthcare and health. And so I decided to go back to Deloitte and try my hand at standing, running, growing new businesses. So in the future of health, so things like next generation research platforms to accelerate drug discovery, things like wellness and well-being being an evolving fit space, things around AI. I mean, I actually started talking about AI quite a lot. Ended up actually acquiring a firm which provided AI services. So these were some of the themes that I got into around building new businesses. And then I left because the startup itch, man, it just never goes away, right? So I've been looking at some startups. Took on an interim role as a CEO for a health tech startup, and also talking to some other plays in that space. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. Well, there's so much to hit there. I didn't know you were involved in the Stoplift project. That's super cool. I remember the case around like shrinkage or whatever they called it for retail when items would get not paid for.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so cool. What were some of the lessons learned from that one? That one was there was like an outsourced human monitoring of the security video.
Yeah, so I started Stoplift with Malloy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Malloy was the main brains behind it.
Yeah.
Former MIT computer vision guy, just really good guy, very good
Yeah.
friend. And it came out of a class. So we actually did Clay Christensen, we did Rebecca Henderson on a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
different things. So we kept building out the idea, and our whole concept was how to have computer watch your video so that you can stop theft. Right. So when you walk into a retail store, you see all these cameras on top, but
Bless you.
sorry, but nobody's ever at the other end because it's too expensive to have humans watch your video. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So our whole concept was if you could digitize different theft modes, how can you detect theft? So, for example, 50% of all theft happens in a case called sweethearting, where I know somebody behind the counter, right? And then they'll either take a product and they'll move it past the scanner, or they'll do
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of things. They may take a different tag and they'll scan something and give you something more expensive. So literally 50% of theft happens because of sweethearting. So we had computers look at these visual images and this video feed to detect what we call the exception reports. And then, of course, humans would corroborate, the video to identify theft and send it over. So that's basically what we had built out. And then NDR, I stepped out after, business school because I really wanted to do disruptive innovation. So Clay asked me to go to Deloitte, but
Mm-hmm.
Malloy really took it forward, and basically in 2018 sold to NCR.
That's super cool. I didn't know that you were involved in it in those early days. I should have contacted you because I just invested in a company called Spot.ai that does basically, machine monitoring of live security video footage. What's your view on that space? I mean, you guys took the insight of outsourced lower cost human review of the cameras, and you could argue, okay, now in 2024, like we don't even need the humans anymore. Do you think that's like eventual kind of end game here, or do you think there's a flaw with that approach using AI to monitor?
So first of all, I think we were well ahead of the curve. In the past 5 years, computer vision has really taken off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So computer vision applications around image recognition, video analysis, I mean, all these spaces have really taken off. So, as you said, Spot.ai, it's actually become a relatively crowded space.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now, the interesting thing is that the ability to analyze video and images has gotten commoditized really quickly in the past few years,
Mm-hmm.
and primarily by the cloud service providers, because they see all that as adding storage. So what they have done is they have created image recognition algorithms and they have open sourced them, because
Mm-hmm.
the more people who use it, the greater the cloud consumption strategy, right? So I think that space has gotten really commoditized quickly. Will humans completely go away? I don't know. I don't think they'll ever completely go away. There will always, but my sense is it's going to be less than 10% of what may have been required, what completely humans would be able to do, right? So 90% of all the work will be done by AI and image recognition algorithms, because they're always on, they don't get tired, you give them a set of rules or they learn, and they can keep performing consistently, right? uh, so that will always happen, and there will be interesting use cases which will keep emerging, where a human will still require to tag and will still require to do things. so that it trains the algorithm. So it's an interesting space, and we are seeing some of the parallels, around these computer vision type image recognition plays around health. I mean, health's a big
Mm-hmm.
one. Radiological images, we're seeing a lot there. We're seeing things around cardiovascular applications, AR, VR applications. I mean, there's a whole space that's emerging, using video feeds and developing video feeds to drive certain outcomes.
Rahul, you touched on something that's I think pretty interesting around, hey, the hyperscalers, the cloud providers, they are seeing all this AI innovation as a kind of demand generation trend for their kind of infrastructure capabilities, and then therefore they're okay giving away a lot of stuff for free, like the models to analyze the video or whatever, because they know they'll get that customer to put all the video stuff on their cloud offering. And I, as a kind of early angel investor, I always wonder, like, man, this cool startup seems great, but are they going to get kind of clobbered by either the incumbents in their own space or even by the kind of upstream foundational providers? What's your take on that? Am I being too pessimistic about the ISV kind of ecosystem for AI?
So, I mean, there are two philosophical questions here, in my opinion. So, first is, are we are these small players going to be competing and be eaten away by these big, large cloud service providers, right? So, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one view. That's one question. But the second question is just the viability of these smaller startups,
Mm-hmm.
and the life expectancy of these startups and an evolving business model on that front, right? So that's the second set of questions, which are very startup centric. So specifically on the first one, I think the cloud service providers, and we've seen this with Google and Gemini, they have struggled to monetize AI. Actually, Google, and you are a former Googler, Google
Mm-hmm.
was well ahead of the curve on the AI front. I mean, it was not open AI. And I've had the privilege to actually work with Google and have access to the sandbox in terms of what they were doing on the fronts of health and other things. And it was well ahead of its time, right? There's a reason why DeepMind built DeepMind at Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the cloud service providers were well ahead on the AI front, but the challenge is, this is the classical Clay Christensen thought process. When the bulk of your money comes from an enterprise play, which is
Mm-hmm.
cloud storage, and you're generating billions of dollars from that play, a nascent AI play will generate maybe millions, maybe 100 millions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your best talent is not going to go down to AI. Your best management focus is not going to be on the AI front. It's all going to be on what's generating our current revenues, which is cloud, right? So the business models that these cloud service providers have evolved into is cloud storage, consumption, compute. I mean, all these plays, right? So which is why they have, because they haven't seen the implications of how AI could be monetized. They have given those tools away for free, and basically that does hurt a lot of innovation, for these smaller startups who could potentially have come in and build these tools, right? So I think I think on that front, the big players will still continue to develop tools which has large scale opportunities, but their model moving away from cloud storage, compute, um, it's going to be really, really difficult. So that's one answer that I have, that I don't think that the cloud service guys are really going to compete and kill all these small startups, because that's not their space. It's too small for them to allocate resources and plays, and they're just going to focus on compute and storage and all that for the cloud. But having said that, they'll threaten these business models, because as something scales, they'll either get acquired, which is good for the startup, but more importantly, they may just launch something in-house. So that's one set of questions. The second was, as I said, was around business viability, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
startup viability. And I think we had a chat once, and you asked me, well, what does the future look like from an AI perspective, right? And if we to get a little bit pedantic here, if you look at the top 100 innovations over the past 300 years, right? I would say the first 30 lasted unchallenged for about 200 years. So I'm talking about electricity, steam engine, blah, blah, blah. You know, there weren't really challengers on those fronts, right? The next 50 probably, or maybe the next 30 to 40, they probably lasted unchallenged for about 80 to 100 years, right? So there were players like the rubber tire makers and so on and so forth, right? The next 20 probably lasted unchallenged for about 20 to 30 years. So think about Motorola came, the Razor, they already
Nokia.
there. Nokia, there you go. Nokia. I mean, that ringtone was notorious, right? Infamous. Like you knew that was a Nokia, right? Or even BlackBerry, right? Imagine, BlackBerry was like such a passionate topic, and where are these guys? Like they didn't even last 20 years, right? So my point is, as we start looking at innovations, the business, I feel like the life cycle and the lifespan of these businesses is dramatically shrinking, and AI has actually made it exponentially worse in a way, so exponentially short, right? So my view is, again, maybe a pessimistic view, or maybe an optimistic view. My view is that we are very quickly skating to a business of one, where you as an entrepreneur, where you as a need finder, where you as a value add person is going to have the ability to stitch together technical tools to provide an entire end-to-end service, product, whatever it may be, and monetize that quickly. You'll be able to use these AI tools to reach audiences. You'll be able to use these AI tools to find audiences. You'll be able to use these AI tools to develop product. You're already seeing these surveys, and everything is AI driven, right? I can come up with a web page by using prompt like natural language. I can just speak to it and say, hey, I don't like this color, or I need something even better, and blah blah blah, right? So you would be able to run an entire enterprise very quickly. So the barriers to entry are going to dramatically shrink, which makes this life cycle, lifespan of these companies, if you're lucky, my sense is you're going to be 3 to 5 years of survival. So business of one is coming. That's where AI is going, and it, as an investor, you look at startups, I look at startups. It's really important for us to start thinking about, if that is what's coming down the pipe, how do we change everything from a venture perspective? So my perspective is, you really need to find people who don't just have, it's not about deep skills, but it's about being able to stitch together these broad tools to test an idea, identify an idea, monetize it, serve it to consumers, and then most importantly, kill it very quickly and be strategically flexible so that you can skate to the next idea. And that's going to be, so your monetizing model may have to be between 3 to 5 years. The monies that you may not be looking at billion-dollar enterprises. Yeah, we saw that with Uber. We saw that with Airbnb. And those things will still happen. There would be platform plays that will come up. But the bulk of the monies is going to actually come from these smaller, quickly monetized opportunities where, the cost of service, the cost of acquisition, everything goes dramatically lower. So that's the second question. So what should startups do? I think the leadership, the people, they all have to start thinking about strategic flexibility. How do we very quickly identify a need? How do we very quickly use these tools to stitch together a solution? And then we serve and monetize this market, and then kill the idea very quickly and skate to the next one.
So Rahul, let me play that back a little, because it's a really interesting observation, to the extent that if what you're saying is you think that because of the newfound capabilities of AI, you're going to get much more competition and innovation at a smaller scale in terms of how many people you need to kind of build an enterprise. If you take that to an extreme, then that would suggest there will be less decacorn kind of, gigantic outcomes from an investor or entrepreneurship point of view. Like, you may not have as many Ubers and Airbnbs and Stripes. You might have like 1,000 flowers blooming, but each flower may, quote unquote, only be worth 10, 100 million bucks. That could fundamentally change the whole venture model. Then the LPs are not going to get their 100x kind of, outlier wins, or as many of them to lift up the whole fund.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that's where I think we may at least have to step back, and may not happen in the next 3 to 5 years, but it could very well start happening. I mean, the number of the number of these big plays may diminish. Now, having said that, unicorns will still come up, right? Mm-hmm. Because the benefits of AI is the ability to scale really, really quickly, right? So the models, if we see some of the models which were, the older models where I sell you something for $1,000, mm-hmm. and then you see different models come out where now I sell you something for $1 a month, right? So the economics start changing where, my volume, it starts becoming a volume play, mm-hmm. right? Versus, I always think of knee replacements, right? Knee replacements, they look for, million people spending $10,000 annually, right? That's the market in the US. So, but the guys who could get rid of knee replacements are actually smart socks manufacturers. And they may sell for $10 a pop, but their market would be 300 million people annually, right? So the economics of the business are very different, because then they could inform different things where, they tell you how to walk, so on and so forth. So I think the economics of these businesses is going to dramatically change. And you're right. I think VC needs to sit back, revisit, and say, hey, you know what? I've been looking at 10%, moonshots, mm-hmm. that became unicorns, that generated the bulk of my return. Now I got to think about, maybe it's not going to be 10%, maybe it's going to be, it's going to be 1%. So the bulk of my monies will actually have to be made through these incremental plays, which are smaller returns. But then the funds would also generate returns. They may not be 7-year funds, because they could be 3-year funds or 5-year funds. So there are all sorts of implications there. Actually, I had a really interesting discussion with the heads of AI at literally the top three private equity funds. And it's not just VC, but PE is also going through the same thing, because what's happened is these Gen AI tools have commoditized the strategy around cost extraction. So until now, private equity has made its money extracting costs, mm-hmm. right? But cost extraction has now become pretty much a data-centric AI play. So what they have realized is that suddenly now they got to figure out growth opportunities. So opportunities in growth, because AI can also decrease the costs of driving growth. And now they have all these private equity funds have a structural imbalance, because what's happened is all the people at the private equity funds are cost focused. They don't have the skill to think about growth. They don't have the skills to think about. So there's a big mismatch in terms of how the industry is playing out, how these funds are going to generate return, and what is required from the environment today because of how quickly AI has come into the landscape. So again, this is the VCPE perspective, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
I do a fair amount of coaching for people that are kind of at various stages of their career. Many of them are trying to pick a AI startup to join. And similarly, when I look at kind of angel investments, you're just looking at deals all the time. And often I'm like, I'm not sure what is the moat for this company and why the incumbent can't just add this as a feature and, put a couple of engineers on it and hit the OpenAI API and come up with something that's good enough. What advice would you have for, let's say, like, mid-career, or they're 5-10 years out of B school, and they're thinking of joining an AI startup. They hear like, well, this is the future. I want to get on a rocket ship. Like, how would you think about evaluating new ventures in this kind of current world?
That's a great point. So I think optionality, or how Black-Scholes, Morton, they talked about options have real value, right? So I think you want to think about your next move from a career perspective, not because of just that move, but more importantly, what options will it open up for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, for example, in the data world, cloud world, if you look at the AI stack or the different players, different levels, you have the large language models, you have the small language models, you have now agentic, single agent systems, you have
Mm-hmm.
multi-agent systems. I mean, there are all these evolving pieces just on the AI front, right? So you,
Mm-hmm.
you want to be able to figure out not just, oh, I'm going to go work with this company because it does AI on radiological images. That may not be the best strategy unless it gives you the options to learn different things. So focus on the options and the value that those options surface, and then make your decision, which basically means don't think about your next job. Think about the 5 opportunities that your next job will open up for you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And maybe I would add that the startups that I've been most impressed by, and the ones that I'm most excited about in terms of where I've deployed a little risk capital, is the ones who are solving a complex customer problem for which AI is part of the solution, but it's not like their entire calling card. And the opposite is the ones where I'm most kind of concerned about, where it's like, oh, yeah, we use Gen AI to create an image. It's like, okay, well, why can't Adobe add that? you know? Yeah, for folks in their careers, I think, to your point, thinking a few steps ahead, and I would add, like, looking at companies that are really holistic about how they're solving a customer problem. And if the entire pitch is about, look at this cool Gen AI demo, sometimes it's the boring stuff, like it's the workflow integration, it's the pricing, it's the marketplace dynamics, it's the customer acquisition strategy. Like, those are all a little bit old school, but they kind of matter. What
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think, sorry.
go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think while they are old school, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that right now in the world of AI, 99% of all plays are cost extraction plays. These are productivity plays.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what do I mean? Executives today still only understand and have risk appetite to make investments where you go to them and you say, hey, you have a 20-person call center, I'm going to bring it down to 2 people.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it, but that's where, that's how a lot of these decisions are being made. We are along the throes of a very similar time as the internet, as mobile phones in the early days. We have to plot those same paths and understand that the value that actually was created through those plays was in models which were completely new, which did not exist and did not only replace costs at the time of their launch, like internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not been just a, hey, we used to do this in this way, now we're going to do it in a separate way, and it's going to be cost, it's going to remove cost. Like, the internet spawned completely different business models which never existed. Cloud would not have existed, right? We wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the internet, and this sort of a business never existed. And I've started seeing that in the AI world. There are a few plays which have started coming up, which are actually could not exist without AI. I mean, you see, there are these businesses where I can put in 3 pictures and I can get a headshot of myself.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I can change the background, and it's really professional. I can change my suit. Everything happens. It's awesome. That sort of a business without AI would not have happened, right? And you're seeing
Yeah.
single people. I mean, it's literally this one guy, and they're who basically runs this business. So to my point, business of one, he generates $500,000 a year. Sorry, a month. And what he's done is he's realized, he's launched 10 other such businesses. So one is doing headshots, something else is developing music. It'll listen to you and it'll look at your 11 labs, like on your voice, voice mimicking stuff. Like it's just amazing how these models are now evolving, where businesses which did not exist and which are beyond what I call the cost extraction productivity equation are springing up. And on that front, I feel AI can have a really big implication on what I call the societal part. So the US is so if I were to drive investment teams across the world, the US is very productivity based. Like the best discussions you have, you walk into an enterprise and you tell them, hey, we're going to increase your productivity 10x, boom, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you start looking at Asia, and I had a great conversation with one of these, somebody who manages investments for one of the top two tech companies in China, right? And he said, he's like, listen, we are making all our investments, or 90 plus % of our investments are focused on the theme of societal benefit, because he's saying, and geriatric is one of those themes, like older population. I mean, you're seeing this in Japan, you're seeing this in Korea, you're seeing this in China, right? So robotics. So suddenly you start seeing, why are they doing so much around robotics? Why are they doing so? It's not a productivity play. It's actually an entire new market that is evolving, right? So again, long story short, I think these evolving business models and how these plays could shape out. I think there's a lot to explore on this front, and the business of one could really become real.
Now, last year was our reunion last year? I think it was like a year ago.
Yep. Last
Okay,
year.
so one of the talks, I think it was Professor Lakhani. He that there was a slide he showed, where he said like, hey, and it was kind of speaking to your point about new business models. He said, look, if you compare the roads in Boston and New York, Boston, they basically paved over these cow paths, and that's why Boston's roads are all kind of windy and whatever. And then New York's like used a grid model because they kind of went in knowing we want this to be efficient and it's going to be a new way of doing it. And he was saying like, if you look at things like eBay, like they would never have existed if it weren't for the internet. Like to your point, like there are certain businesses that there's entirely new models that are created. And a lot of companies are taking the Boston model, which is like, well, we have a call center. We'll now make it more efficient. It's like paving over the cow path. I've not seen many of the New York model examples in AI. My visibility is I see a lot of stuff at the foundational level with the cloud providers or people building new models, some infrastructure to evaluate models, this and that. And then I see a lot of features where they, hit up the OpenAI API and add it to a product. But it's generally to an existing product category that already exists. I'm curious, like, where do you see like the really groundbreaking, like, oh my God, there would never have been an Uber without the mobile phone technology, and we'll say there would never have been a blank without Gen AI. Like I'm not yet seeing those emerge. Are you seeing some? It sounds like you're seeing some inklings come out now.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, very nascent, because Gen AI has been around forever. I mean, when we started MySkin, in 30 milliseconds, we could look at people's skin and compare cohorts and tell you what you should do for your skin along the dimensions of product, diet, and lifestyle, right? At that time, we used to call them algorithms, right? So AI is an evolution from there. I mean, of course, the techniques have dramatically improved. ChatGPT has basically been a marketing wrapper. It's been a consumer centric wrapper which has brought the power of AI or introduced AI to the average person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So AI is still, in its infancy, because it's been 2 years, that ChatGPT launched and made this real. People are still, they're still playing around with ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity. I mean, all these models, but these models they're not, they're next word predictive algorithms, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a statistical approach. It's not really intelligent. And the debate is, okay, when will AGI come in, right? Singularity, AGI, I mean, all this stuff. Uh, I don't know. I think, I mean, there's differing views. I think people are saying that in the next 5 years, and it could potentially happen. Um, but there are plays that have started emerging, right? So, for example, let me give you, I already talked about the headshot, which is a new business model, right? Another play on the AI front is music. So you look at creativity. So our friend Micah invested in this company called Suno. They just raised a round for, I think, about $200 million, right? But
Mm-hmm.
basically, I can go there again using AI. I can use natural language and say, "Hey, I'm going to talk to Tom, and we're going to talk about AI. Write me a song in a rap tune." Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, ChatGPT could come up with lyrics because that's easier to do, but embedding music and a score into those lyrics, that's exponentially difficult. And I
Mm-hmm.
showed it to a composer. There's a girl who, composes music, and she didn't know about it, and she was like, you know what, these AI tools are a bunch of crap, and it's not going to replace me, blah blah blah. And I said, listen, I'm just going to show you this,
Mm-hmm.
and I put in a prompt. And in 30 seconds, I had two examples of scores that had been developed. And the blood drained from her face,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that was one example. I've actually been working with, I've been advising one of these startups doing agentic systems.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is really cool. I mean, this is beyond cutting edge. So, one of the problems with this venture studio was we get 100 business plans a week to evaluate business ideas, right? Now, imagine every VC fund needs to have bunch of people who look through all these ideas, understand the market, interview, blah, 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 right? Takes a while to evaluate one idea. I mean, let's say even efficiently, if it takes you a week, that's a lot of weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big team of people that you need to be doing this stuff. So we actually replicated virtually an entire management team. So we took a consulting team. So there's an MD at top. The MD he's trained on a broad, like an HBS, broad general management skill set. So when you email him the business plan, he'll look at it and he'll say, hey, I think in this business plan, I need to understand more pricing. I need to understand more about competitive strategy. I need to understand more about technology viability. Like he'll identify and prioritize based on LLMs and similar business plans and all that, success rates. Like he'll be able to parse out and identify those areas. Then he'll parse it or send it to an analyst, again, a virtual person who's trained on that particular skill set, right? Pricing, she'll just go straight into pricing, and competitive research, she'll just go straight into competitive research. She'll look around, blah, blah, blah. Then she sends it to a manager. These are all virtual people, by the way, mind you. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
virtual avatar. And the beauty is you can hear the conversation. It's completely traceable. So on the side, you get a transcript. So there's a virtual person, MD, who then sends it, and the analyst will do a thing, and she'll send it to her manager, and the manager is trained on a different LLM.
Yeah.
So a different model, right? So what she'll do is she'll use her insight to train the previous AI. So AI is using AI where it'll say, hey, here in your competitive research, these are the gaps. I want you to do this, and maybe you can look at X resource or Y resource and try this and try that, right? So it uses AI to improve AI. So suddenly AI is reinforcing itself, and this whole thing happens in real time. You can hear the conversation. As a human, you can interject into the conversation because it's natural language, and I can
Mm-hmm.
speak to it. Ah, no, I don't agree with this. And hey, why do you think you're making that decision? Hey, can you change the process? Everything is happening fluidly, and in minutes, it comes up with an investment memorandum. It comes up with a scatter plot which shows hey, when it evaluates every idea, right? So 100 ideas, I just need them sorted out. AI will give me the top 20, and I may go in and say, yeah, you know what, 21 needs to be 18. And this is my rationale. What happens? AI learns, the virtual team learns.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed it to one of the top VCs, and he was like, holy smoke. He said, I never thought that I would be convinced that my analyst teams would be challenged by AI. And he said, this is real. And I showed it to Shrikant Datar, the dean of HBS. I told him, I said, hey, how about people just hire, on the instead of downloading HBS cases, have my virtual HBS MBA that I can subscribe to.
Mm.
I have a business problem. I send him a business problem. And he, does this multi-agent debate, optimizes things, and tells me a solution. Right? He talks to my finance professor, marketing professor, blah, blah, blah. The journalist sits on top of these guys and they have this debate. Like, I can follow all this. And Shrikant was like, wow. He says, Rahul, his first comment was, Rahul, you're commoditizing the Harvard MBA. And I told him, I said, yeah. I said, hi, Shrikant, yes. I said, it better be me than somebody else. Right?
Yeah. I'm curious, did you find that the insights and kind of conclusions and the investor memo was notably superior using the multi-agent approach where you had multiple models kind of collaborating in a way versus just asking one model to produce an investment memo for this thing? Like, was it noticeably different?
Very different. I mean, the quality. So, when you look at, and to get a little bit academic on the AI side, we look at Gaia benchmarks because, these are today's LLMs, and what we are talking about is what I call first level inference. So advanced reasoning. So so for example, I give the example of, or actually one of my colleagues gives, the tech guy I work with, he gives this example. If I give an AI a picture of astronauts on the moon, and I say, hey, I don't even need to say it's on the moon. I say, what is this? Right? That's first level reasoning. That's where today we are all talking about first level reasoning. Right? Second level reasoning is, I say, who are the guys in this picture and what were their birth dates? So it needs to figure out that, okay, these are astronauts. This picture is from this time, which was taken at so and so forth time. And then, and then it needs to calculate and say, okay, these are the guys, these were their birth years. So they are X years old when this photograph was taken. That's second level reasoning. Right? Third level reasoning is things which do not exist. Where it starts coming up, where you can start asking it questions like, hey, which ones of these was the least experienced? That's really complex. Like, it has to understand the meaning of experience. So maybe flying hours. So then, it has to go through these pictures, go figure out their flying hours, what they flew, blah, 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 add it up and then determine least of this math model. Right. So that's really advanced reasoning. So Gaia benchmark. So we focus on, so when we've built these multi-agent models, it's focused on these third level tertiary inference mechanisms. And that's why it's off the scale, right? This is, now having said that, I still say that the product only needs to be 80% good. You never get to 100%. 100% is a iterative, continuous process, and it starts becoming really, really expensive to become 100% good. Right? So it needs to be 80% good, where a human can then interject and play with it and say, hey, you know what? This is good, this is not good, blah, blah, blah. And the AI learns again. So for example, let's correlate how this could be helpful. So any debate or optimization challenge, right? So today, let's say at an executive team at any place, they meet to discuss an innovation idea. Right? You know this. I mean, it takes 2 months to get a meeting for 6 people. The head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of finance, the head of operations, technology, CEOs there. It takes 2 months, right? So they get into a room and then listen to the idea, and then they generate a path. They say, hey, go back and do this and do that and come up with this process. Next 2 months, then these guys come back and then they're like, okay, here are some of the outputs, blah blah blah. And then these guys give some feedback. They're like, again, no, we need to change this, go dive into this, talk to this person, blah blah blah. Right? Go back 2 more months. Making a decision ends up, if you're really efficient, becomes a 6 to 8 month process. Now imagine these multi-agent models who sit with you in this room. You get an idea, they've already done all the work in minutes. And this executive team can just sit there and say, hey, how about you change the process? Boom. And again, the process adjusts. The process adjusts. You can make a change in real time. And then it'll come up with, and you can just ask it questions. Hey, what about if we change, the acquisition cost from X to Y? Boom.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I think one of the insights I'm hearing is that many of us have been using, let's say, GPT 4.0, and we're like, oh, it's a great model. I use it for a lot of things. And I think what you're saying is when you have this multi-agent approach where you're actually using maybe a variety of models that have been tuned or optimized for specific perspectives, you're kind of recreating the magic of a cross-functional kind of like varsity team at a Google or a Deloitte or McKinsey or whatever. And that's going to produce better, more nuanced, more better judgment kind of decisions than just asking a giant kind of large model on its own.
Spot on.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah,
and this is why, when I show people our multi-agent model, literally people's blood drains, blood from their face drains, right? They just go, oh my God. Because that's exactly what happens. If you think about a cross-functional team making decisions, which needs to debate.
Yes.
Every organizational challenge is about resource allocation. So finance guy wants to drive down costs, and marketing wants more marketing budget, and finance wants, or technology wants more tech budget. And then there's got to be this debate. Well, guess what? Now you can have a virtual team doing that debate, and you can see the transcript. You can see why they made those decisions, and you can interact with it so that you can change. You can guide your virtual team.
I love it, Rahul. We could speak for hours on this. I want to be respectful of your time, and I actually would like to wrap up with a non-business and technology question. Because, whenever we get together at our kind of alumni dinners and things, we often talk about life. And I was having a conversation with my oldest son, who's a rising junior in high school. And we were reflecting that, wow, in 24 months, he won't be with us in this house anymore. Hopefully he'll be somewhere in college. And
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
I'm not rising junior.
I'm curious, what are your reflections on parenting, and especially maybe in this new age that we're entering? Like, is the advice that we got when we were going to college still applicable? Or I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I think I've kind of started alluding to that answer a bit. Like, I tell my daughter, she's a rising junior too, and I've said that the ability for you to be strategically flexible, the ability for you to do things which are innovative and risk-taking, which leverage these tech tools, being able to do that quickly and doing this with a wrapper of great communication, that's going to define how happy you are and how successful you are, and how rich your own journey turns out to be. So at one thumb rule, or there are two thumb rules I give her. So one is, I always say, do more that others are doing less of. Right? So for example, if others are reading less, read more. If others are spending more time on screens watching YouTube, well, that you do less. If others are exercising less, you do exercise more. If others are doing less of in-person communication, meeting with people, that's what you do more. Right? So do less that others are doing more, and do more that others are doing less. So I think one theme I give her. And then the second
Mm-hmm.
piece of advice I give her is just focus on doing the hard things. When you have a fork, every day we face decisions. Like I could walk to the mall, which is a mile away, or I could drive. Hard decision is whether I walk. Easy decision is whether I drive. What is better for me? Almost invariably, the hard decision is almost always the right decision. To do the hard things.
Mm.
Right? So every day in life, I mean, I'm just giving you a very simple example. Like, do I want to eat sweets or not? The hard thing is to stay away from them, for at least for me. But I know that's the right thing,
Yeah.
right? Dragging yourself out of bed every day to go work out, not easy. Almost
How
always
does
the right thing.
how does she respond to that advice? Do you find that she's embracing it, or how I'm curious how that conversation goes.
I think she does imbibe it. She's actually a pretty careful listener,
Mm-hmm.
and in her own way, she actually does imbibe and do things. This generation is really amazing, actually. And I spend a lot of time with these kids, and there's this narrative that these guys are lazy and all this stuff. No, they are hardworking. They are extremely intelligent. At their age, I didn't have 20% of the awareness that these kids have. They have their awareness in terms of cultures, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the world, what's happening, technology, like everything, business models. I didn't even know at high school. I don't think I even knew what a business model meant. Right. So I think, and I've spent. I mean, when I go, I love going to their high school and sitting in their hackathons.
Mm.
Wow. I mean, the ideas these guys talk about CRISPR and genetic editing, and I didn't. They don't talk about this when they're at home, right? So I went there and I was like, wow. The same thing. I actually, a bunch of Harvard undergrads had invited me for dinner. I was like the only old fogey in this room, and it was amazing. I mean, these kids, they operate at a different level. One guy wanted to bring democracy into this country. Another person wanted to, securitize crypto, and she came up with this opportunity where she said, "Hey, if your passkeys get lost, then what?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you put in place authentication? So I mean, the level of I think the current generation, the level of insight that these guys have is it makes me feel really optimistic, and that's why the business of them doing the hard things, them having an awareness around climate and implications and so on and so forth. I'm very optimistic, and I hope both our kids as they head into college will continue to take that flag forward.
Yeah, I would build on what you said earlier around optionality. It reminds me of, I think in 2012, 13, 14, data science was like the thing, big data. And everybody was like, oh, you need to get a degree in data science. And then, it was, Web3, and now it's going to be Gen AI. And I think if you go to college trying to optimize for what's going to be hot 5 years from now, like it's very hard to predict. But what you can predict is that it will change every few years. And the people who are able to learn and acquire knowledge and synthesize it, and to your point, communicate and collaborate with other humans repeatedly and be really agile about that, I think will be most likely to be, positioned well. And I think the inverse is like over specialization into one field, I think is perhaps the most risky move for anyone right now. So
I
hopefully,
completely agree.
hopefully our kids listen to this podcast. I doubt it, but I'll send a link to my son and say, hey, skip to minute 50. There's some good advice for you from Rahul. Any other thoughts you wanted to share, Rahul, and how can people kind of keep track of what you're working on and what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm doing some cool work with a couple of startups, VCs, I mean, all that kind of good stuff. A lot on the AI front. So I keep posting on LinkedIn, so that's great. Uh, just having, focusing on learning and the options. I think I'm applying the same lessons to myself, nothing different.
100%. Well, I'm looking forward
And
to
trying to do
getting
the
you
hard
back
thing. I
on.
got into the AI. Yeah, and it's like on the AI front, you learn, the language is completely different. I mean, it's like a different learning a different language. You talk about RAGs and optimizing and multi-agent and agentic systems and LLMs and SLMs and all these different language, right? Knowledge graphs. I mean, you think about all these things, and it's been a phenomenal learning process. So I think from that perspective, you'll see my updates on LinkedIn. I keep writing a bunch of things, and hopefully it'll keep the tapestry of exciting experiences going for my life. So that's my goal.
I'm
That
sure
may
of it.
happen.
I'm sure you're going to do some amazing things as you always have, and encourage everyone to follow you on LinkedIn. You've always got thought-provoking observations and insights. So, grateful for having you on the Fireside PM podcast and live stream, and hopefully we'll get you back again in the future.
Sounds good, Tom. Thanks for having me. This
You
is
bet.
wonderful. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care, Rahul.
Bye.
Bye. All right. I have to jump to a call, so I'm going to give a 30-second wrap up. First is, I think the most interesting thing that we talked about was the search for the next generation business models that are enabled by AI. I don't think we've seen it in full focus yet. I think the second thing was the difficulty of a lot of startups to have sustainable business models that are using AI that have incredible kind of feature capabilities, but then you have to ask yourself, like, is this a business? And then I think the third thing was I had a lot of fun at the very end talking with Rahul about parenting and preparing the next generation. And it does seem like the pace of change keeps increasing over time, perhaps since the beginning of of history. And that change is accelerating exponentially. And so developing the next generation of humans that can adapt to that rapid change, maybe adaptability is perhaps the one thing that I'll try and encourage my kids to develop, and hopefully others will too. But let me know in the comments below what you thought of the conversation, any takeaways, or anything we missed that you'd like to be covered in the future. Subscribe to my Substack. It's free, firesidepm.substack.com, where I summarize a lot of these conversations. You can also listen to this on the podcast. And hey, Michelle, thanks for the shout out there. Yes, HBS03 all the way. See you guys later. Bye. Let's get back to work.